Jack Reacher had no particular reason to be in Redemption, Arizona. The town was a speck of dust on a sun-bleached map, a place you passed through on your way to somewhere else. He'd gotten off the bus simply because his legs had grown stiff, and the idea of walking 20 miles to the next town seemed more appealing than another 4 hours of recycled air and rattling windows. The heat hit him first, a solid physical presence. It radiated from the asphalt of the single main street and shimmered above the tin roofs of the tired-looking buildings. Redemption felt quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a held-breath quiet, the kind that comes before a storm or after a threat. Reacher felt it in the way people walked, their shoulders slightly hunched, their eyes darting to shadows instead of meeting his gaze. He found a diner with a buzzing neon sign that read, "Eat," half the letters dark. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried bacon. A few patrons were scattered at the tables, nursing mugs and staring into the middle distance. They all looked up when he entered, a flicker of something, assessment, maybe fear, in their eyes, before they looked away again. A stranger was an event here. Reacher was a big event. At 6'5", with a chest like a barrel and hands that looked like they could crush stone, he was impossible to ignore. He took a stool at the counter. The waitress, a woman with tired lines etched around her eyes, approached him cautiously. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low. "Please," Reacher said. "Black, and a menu." She slid a greasy laminated menu in front of him and poured the coffee. It was bitter and had been sitting on the burner for hours. Reacher drank it anyway. He ordered a cheeseburger and fries, and as he waited, he watched. He was good at watching. It was a skill honed over 13 years as a military policeman. He noticed things. He noticed the way the cook in the back kept glancing through the service window, not at him, but at the door. He noticed how the other customers ate without enjoyment, as if getting food was a chore to be completed quickly and without fuss. The bell over the door chimed, and 2 men in sheriff's deputy uniforms walked in. They were big but soft in the middle, their authority resting more in their holstered pistols than in their physical presence. They didn't take a seat. They walked straight to the counter, and the waitress flinched, almost imperceptibly. "Mornin', Sally," the taller one said, his voice a gravelly drawl. He leaned over the counter, getting too close. "Smells good. The boss wants his usual." Sally nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I'll get it started." The deputy grinned, a slow, unpleasant expression. He reached out and snagged a donut from the display case. "Don't mind if I do." He took a large bite, then looked over at Reacher, his eyes narrowing. "You're new." It wasn't a question. Reacher took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't answer. Silence was often the best answer. It forced the other person to fill it, and they usually filled it with mistakes. The deputy's grin faltered. He wasn't used to being ignored. "I said you're new." "Passing through?" Reacher said, his voice calm and even. "People don't pass through Redemption," the other deputy chimed in. "They got business here, or they keep going. What's your business?" "Lunch," Reacher said, turning his attention to the cheeseburger Sally placed in front of him. The deputies exchanged a look. This wasn't going the way they were used to. They were the muscle, the casual intimidation that kept the town in line. A stranger who didn't react with the appropriate level of fear was an anomaly, an unwelcome one. "You got a name?" the first deputy pressed. "Yes," Reacher said. He picked up his burger. Frustration creased the deputy's brow. He gestured vaguely at Reacher. "We don't like trouble here. Finish your food and be on your way. Next bus is at 4. Reacher took a bite of his burger. It was decent. He ignored them and kept eating. Defeated by his complete lack of engagement, the deputies finally retreated to a booth, muttering to each other. They watched him, but Reacher focused on his meal. He finished his burger, his fries, and 2 more cups of coffee. He left a generous tip for Sally, who gave him a quick, grateful glance, and walked back out into the oppressive heat. Instead of heading for the bus station, he started walking down the main street. He wanted to see the town. It didn't take long. There was a general store, a bar with blacked-out windows, a single-pump gas station, a library, and a sheriff's office. The whole place felt like a movie set for a forgotten Western. At the end of the street, he saw something that made him pause. The two deputies from the diner were there, along with a third man, older, with a sheriff's star pinned to his shirt. Sheriff Brody. He was bigger than his deputies, with a hard gut and a mean, flushed face. They had a young man, barely a teenager, backed against a wall. The kid had a bag of groceries, and a can of peaches had rolled onto the dusty ground. "You think you can just take what you want, boy?" Brody snarled, poking the kid in the chest. "I paid for it," the kid stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "I got the receipt right here." "I say you didn't," Brody said, his voice getting louder. "I say you're a thief, and we know what we do with thieves in my town." One of the deputies kicked the can of peaches, sending it clattering down the sidewalk. The kid flinched. The few people on the street hurried past, their heads down, pretending not to see. This was the source of the quiet. Fear. It was as thick and heavy as the midday heat. Reacher had a choice. He could turn around, walk to the bus station, and leave this town to its misery. It wasn't his problem. He had no stake here. But he'd seen this kind of casual cruelty before, in far-flung places around the world. Bullies in uniforms were the same everywhere, and he'd never been able to just walk away. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just started walking towards them. His pace was unhurried, his expression neutral. But his size and the sheer deliberate nature of his approach were enough. Brody and his deputies stopped their torment of the kid and turned to face him. Their hands, almost by instinct, moved to rest on the butts of their guns. Reacher didn't stop until he was standing a few feet away. He didn't look at Brody. He looked at the kid. "You all right?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the still air. The kid just stared, speechless. Brody stepped forward, planting himself between Reacher and the boy. He had to look up. "This is official police business. Walk away." Reacher finally moved his gaze to meet the sheriff's. He didn't say a word. He just held his stare. He let Brody see the absolute lack of fear in his eyes. He let him see the cold, calculating intelligence behind them. He let him feel the implicit threat of his coiled stillness. The silence stretched. The sun beat down. Brody's face grew redder. He was the law in redemption. He was the power. But this stranger wasn't playing by his rules. The stranger was looking at him like he was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. Finally, with a curse under his breath, Brody broke the stare. He jabbed a thick finger at the kid. "Get out of here. I catch you stealing again. You'll regret it." He turned back to Reacher. "And you, I warned you. The 4 o'clock bus. Be on it." Brody and his men turned and stomped back towards their office. Reacher watched them go. Then he bent down, picked up the can of peaches, and handed it to the trembling kid. "Thank you, mister," the boy whispered. "Go home," Reacher said. The boy scurried away. Reacher stood alone on the street. The 4 o'clock bus was an option, the smart option. But Reacher knew he wouldn't be on it. He had missed it the moment he decided to walk toward the sheriff. He wasn't passing through anymore. He was involved. He turned and walked in the opposite direction, toward the town's only motel. He was going to need a room for the night. The motel was a low, U-shaped building with peeling paint. The man at the desk was old and nervous, his hands shaking as he took Reacher's cash for a room. He didn't ask for ID. He just wanted the transaction to be over. Reacher got the key to room 7 at the far end of the building. It had a lumpy bed, a stained carpet, and a window that overlooked a dirt lot full of weeds. It was perfect. He knew they would come for him. It was a certainty. Brody's authority had been challenged in public. He couldn't let that stand. They wouldn't come to the motel. Too many potential witnesses, even in a town this scared. They would wait. Try to catch him on the street or at the diner. Reacher went back to the diner for dinner. He chose a booth this time, one in the corner that gave him a clear view of the entire room and the front door. He ordered the steak special and another coffee. Sally served him, her movements quick and jerky. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered, setting his plate down. Brody, he doesn't forget. I'm not worried about Brody's memory, Reacher said. He ate his steak slowly, methodically. He was in no hurry. He was waiting, and he didn't have to wait long. Just as he was finishing his coffee, the bell on the door chimed. It wasn't Brody. It was 4 men. They weren't wearing uniforms. They were big, rough-looking men in work boots and flannel shirts. They looked like miners or ranch hands, but their eyes were cold and hard. They spread out, blocking the exit. The few remaining customers in the diner froze. One of the men, a giant with a thick red beard, walked toward Reacher's booth. The boss wants a word, he said. His voice was a low rumble. He doesn't like strangers making trouble in his town. Who's the boss? Reacher asked, not moving from his seat. Jedediah Kane, the man said, as if the name itself should be enough. Now, are you coming quietly, or do we have to persuade you? Reacher took a final sip of his coffee and set the mug down gently. I think you're going to have to persuade me. The man with the red beard lunged. It was a mistake. He was big, but he was slow and clumsy. Reacher moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He didn't get up. He simply shifted his weight, drove his right elbow into the man's exposed ribs. There was a sickening crack. The man gasped, the air driven from his lungs, his face a mask of agony. Before the others could react, Reacher was out of the booth. The second man swung a wild punch. Reacher ducked under it, stepped inside, and delivered a short, brutal jab to the man's throat. The man gagged, clutching his neck, his eyes bulging. The third and fourth men came at him together. They were smarter, trying to flank him. Reacher backpedaled, using the tables and chairs to control their approach. The third man grabbed a heavy glass sugar dispenser and threw it. Reacher deflected it with his forearm and kicked a chair into the man's shins. As he stumbled, Reacher closed the distance and hit him with a devastating headbutt. The man went down like a sack of cement. The last man hesitated. He saw his 3 companions on the floor, groaning, one of them possibly with a crushed larynx. He saw Reacher standing there, not even breathing heavily, his eyes like chips of ice. The man's bravado evaporated. He turned and fled out the door. Silence descended on the diner. Sally stood behind the counter, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The cook was peeking through the service window, his face pale. Reacher looked at the 3 men on the floor. He hadn't wanted to cause this much damage, but they had forced his hand. He walked to the counter, pulled a 20 from his pocket, and laid it down. For the steak, he said to Sally. And the mess. He walked out of the diner and into the cool night air. The street was empty. The fight had probably lasted less than a minute, but the message had been sent. Jedediah Kane, whoever he was, now knew that the stranger in town was not someone who could be easily persuaded. The stakes had just been raised for everyone. The next morning, Reacher decided to learn more about Jedediah Kane. The best place to find information in a small town was usually the library. It was a small brick building, cleaner and better maintained than most of the other structures in Redemption. Inside, it was cool and quiet. A young woman with intelligent eyes and brown hair tied back in a neat bun sat at the front desk. She was the first person he'd seen in town who didn't look perpetually afraid. Cautious, yes, but not afraid. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'd like to look at some old newspapers," Reacher said. "Local history." "The archives are in the back," she said, gesturing. "Is there anything specific you're looking for?" "Accidents," Reacher said. "Industrial accidents. Mining, maybe." Her eyes flickered with understanding. She lowered her voice. "My name is Sarah, and you're the man from the diner last night." "News travels fast," Reacher replied. "In Redemption, bad news travels at the speed of light," she said. "You should be careful. You made an enemy of Jedediah Kane." "So I've heard. Tell me about him." Sarah hesitated, looking around the empty library. "He owns everything. The old silver mine, the biggest ranch, half the businesses on Main Street. He provides the jobs, so he makes the rules." Sheriff Brody is just his errand boy. Kane came here about 10 years ago. Things changed. People who stood up to him had accidents, or they just left, disappeared. And no one does anything? Who would? She asked, a note of bitterness in her voice. The county government is 100 miles away and doesn't care. The state police never come out here unless there's a body they can't ignore. We're on our own. She led him to the back room, a dusty space filled with bound volumes of the Old Town newspaper. Look for anything related to the KM Corporation. That's Kane's company. You'll find plenty of accidents. All of them ruled unfortunate, but unavoidable. Reacher spent the next few hours poring over the brittle yellowed pages. Sarah was right. There was a pattern. A rancher who refused to sell his land to Kane died in a tractor rollover. A town councilman who questioned Kane's water rights was killed in a hunting accident. A journalist who started asking questions drove his car off a bridge on a clear, dry night. It was a trail of convenient deaths and disappearances that painted a clear picture of Kane's decade-long reign of terror. As he was reading, Sarah brought him a glass of water. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked quietly. "I think so," Reacher said. "This man Kane isn't just a bully. He's a serial killer who uses a town as his own private hunting ground." "What are you going to do?" It was the question he'd been asking himself. What was he going to do? He wasn't the police. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man passing through. But he had stumbled into this, and he couldn't just walk away and leave people like Sarah to live under Kane's thumb. "I'm going to finish it," Reacher said, his voice flat and certain. That evening, he knew they would come for him again, and this time, it wouldn't be with fists. He sat in his motel room, the single chair wedged under the doorknob, and waited. The sun went down, casting long shadows across the dirt lot. Darkness fell completely. Around midnight, he heard it. The soft crunch of gravel outside his window. Not one person, but several. He moved away from the window, flattening himself against the wall beside it. A dark shape appeared, then another. They weren't trying the door. A gloved hand appeared, working something into the cheap lock on the window frame. Reacher waited. The lock clicked open. The window slid up with a soft groan. A man started to climb through, leading with a silenced pistol. The moment his head and shoulders were inside, Reacher moved. He grabbed the man by his hair and the back of his shirt and yanked him the rest of the way through the window, slamming his face into the floor. The man went limp. A second man started to follow. Reacher grabbed the first man's pistol from his stunned hand. He didn't fire it. He used it as a club, bringing the heavy metal down on the second man's wrist as he reached through the window. There was a sharp crack of bone. The man screamed, a high, thin sound that was quickly muffled. Outside, there was a frantic whisper. "What's going on?" Reacher didn't give them time to figure it out. He kicked the door open, shattering the chair that had been bracing it. He burst out into the night. There were two more men there, momentarily blinded by the sudden explosion of movement from the room. One of them raised his weapon. He was too slow. Reacher charged, covering the 10 feet between them in 3 long strides. He slammed his shoulder into the first man, driving him back against the wall of the motel with enough force to knock the wind out of him. He spun, blocking a pistol aimed at his head by the fourth man, twisting the man's arm until the weapon clattered to the ground. An elbow to the jaw sent the man stumbling back, his eyes dazed. Reacher went back to the one he'd pinned against the wall. He delivered 2 quick, precise punches to the man's stomach and a third to his chin. The man collapsed. The last one standing, the one with the broken wrist, was trying to scramble away. Reacher caught him easily. "Who sent you?" Reacher demanded, his voice a low growl. The man, cradling his shattered arm, was crying in pain. "Kane. Kane sent us. He said to get rid of you, make it look like a robbery." "Where is he?" "At his ranch," the man whimpered. "North of town. About 5 miles. It's a fortress." Reacher let him go. The man stumbled off into the darkness. Reacher stood over the 3 unconscious forms on the ground. This was the escalation he had expected. Cain had tried intimidation, then he had tried murder. He had failed both times. Now Cain would be angry, and he would be unpredictable. He would go after anyone Reacher had spoken to. He would go after Sarah. A cold dread settled in Reacher's stomach. He had to get to her. He ran, his long legs eating up the dark, empty streets. He reached the small apartment building where Sarah lived. The front door was unlocked. Her apartment was on the second floor. The door was ajar, splintered near the lock. He pushed it open. The small living room was a wreck. Books were torn from shelves, cushions were slashed, a lamp was overturned. She was gone. On the small table in the center of the room, there was a single piece of paper held down by a knife plunged into the wood. The message was simple, written in a crude scrawl: "Leave town now, or the girl dies slowly." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Reacher pulled the knife from the table. The cold steel felt heavy in his hand. This was no longer about a town's quiet fear or a bully's casual cruelty. Cain had made it personal. He had taken the one person in redemption who had shown any courage, the one person who had been willing to help. He had made a fatal mistake. He had given Jack Reacher a reason to stay. He had given him a mission. Reacher didn't need a detailed plan. In situations like this, complex plans were the first casualty of contact with the enemy. He needed a destination, an objective, and a method. The destination was Cain's ranch. The objective was Sarah. The method would be simple, direct, and final. He went back to his motel room, ignoring the groaning men still scattered on the ground. He didn't have a weapon, not a real one. The silenced pistol he'd taken was a professional piece of equipment, but Reacher preferred not to rely on guns. They were loud, they ran out of ammunition, and they made people overconfident. He left it on the bed. His body was his weapon, and his mind was his compass. He walked out to the edge of town, to the dark road that led north. The 5-mile walk would give him time to think. The moon was a sliver in the sky, providing just enough light to see the silhouette of the mountains ahead. Cain's ranch was nestled in their foothills. A fortress, the man had said. Fortresses had walls, and walls had weaknesses. As he walked, the rage inside him cooled into a single, hard point of focus. He wasn't thinking about justice for the town anymore, or about teaching a lesson to a tyrant. He was thinking about a young woman in a library who had trusted him, and he was thinking about the man who had taken her. The ranch came into view after an hour's walk. It was a sprawling compound, surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire. A main gate was lit by floodlights, and he could see at least 2 guards stationed there. The main house was a large, modern structure, all glass and dark wood, ablaze with lights. Several smaller buildings, probably bunkhouses and barns, were scattered around it. Reacher didn't go near the gate. He circled the perimeter, moving through the darkness like a phantom. He found what he was looking for on the western side, where a dry creek bed ran under the fence line. The recent heat had baked the ground hard, leaving a gap of a couple of feet between the bottom of the fence and the cracked earth of the creek. It was a small oversight, but it was all he needed. He slid under the fence and was inside the compound. He moved from shadow to shadow, his eyes scanning everything, mapping the layout, noting the positions of the guards. There were more of them than he expected, at least a dozen patrolling the grounds. Cain was paranoid. Or he was expecting an army. He wasn't expecting one man. Reacher's first target was the generator shed, a small brick building humming away near the back of the property. A single guard stood near the door, smoking a cigarette. Reacher came up behind him out of the darkness. The guard never heard him. A swift, hard chop to the back of the neck, and the man crumpled without a sound. Reacher dragged him into the shadows. Inside the shed, he found the main circuit breaker for the entire compound. With a heavy thud, he plunged the ranch into absolute darkness. Shouts of confusion and alarm erupted from all over the compound. Flashlight beams cut through the night, creating chaotic patterns. This was the confusion he needed. In the dark, he was the predator, and they were the prey. He moved toward the main house. 2 guards were fumbling at the front door, trying to get inside. Reacher took them down from behind, one with a chokehold, the other with a hard knee to the spine. He slipped through the door and into the house. Inside, more men were running around, flashlights in hand, shouting orders. Reacher ignored them, heading for what he assumed was Kane's office. He found it at the end of a long hallway. The door was thick oak. He could hear voices inside. One of them was Sheriff Brody. The other must be Kane. He didn't knock. He put his shoulder to the door and slammed his full 250-pound weight against it. The frame splintered and the door flew open. Jedediah Kane was behind a massive desk, a powerful flashlight in one hand and a large revolver in the other. He was a big man, as tall as Reacher but heavier, with a face used to getting its own way. Sheriff Brody stood beside him, his own gun drawn, his face pale with shock. "Who the hell are you?" Kane bellowed. Brody answered for him, his voice trembling. "It's him, the stranger." Kane leveled his revolver. "You made a mistake coming here." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, but Reacher wasn't there. He had dived to the side the moment he saw Kane's finger tighten on the trigger. He rolled behind a large leather sofa as another shot tore through the air where he had been. Brody started to move around the desk. Reacher kicked a heavy coffee table into his path. The sheriff tripped, sprawling to the floor. Reacher was on him in an instant. He brought his fist down on Brody's gun hand, and the weapon skittered across the floor. A second punch to the temple, and Brody was unconscious. Reacher came up from behind the sofa. Kane fired again, the bullet whizzing past Reacher's ear. Reacher charged. He closed the distance before Kane could fire a fourth time. He grabbed the barrel of the revolver, twisting it with all his strength. Metal groaned, and Kane cried out in pain as his finger was broken in the trigger guard. The gun fell to the floor. Now it was just the two of them. Kane was strong, a brawler used to overpowering his opponents. He threw a wild haymaker. Reacher ducked under it and drove his fist into Kane's stomach. The air rushed out of the big man. Reacher followed it with a series of short, punishing blows to the ribs and kidneys. Kane grunted in pain, stumbling back. "My town," Kane gasped. "My rules!" "Your town is gone," Reacher said, his voice cold. "And your rules are over. Where is she?" Kane spat a mouthful of blood onto the expensive rug. He lunged, trying to tackle Reacher to use his weight. It was like tackling a mountain. Reacher stood his ground, absorbed the impact, and then used Kane's momentum against him, throwing him over his hip. Kane crashed into the massive oak desk, which splintered under his weight. Reacher stood over him. "Last chance. Where's the girl?" Kane just glared at him with pure hatred. Reacher picked up a heavy glass paperweight from the ruined desk. He didn't have to use it. The sound of sirens cut through the night, growing steadily closer. Sarah. She must have gotten free, or someone from the diner or the motel had finally found their courage and made a call. Kane heard the sirens too. The look in his eyes changed from rage to panic. His empire was crumbling. "She's in the cellar," he rasped, defeated. "The door is in the kitchen." Reacher left him there, broken and gasping on the floor of his ruined office. He found the cellar door and went down the steep wooden steps. Sarah was at the bottom, tied to a chair, a gag in her mouth. Her eyes were wide with fear, but they filled with relief when she saw him. He quickly untied her. "Are you all right?" he asked, pulling the gag away. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I thought he was going to... I heard the power go out, then the shooting." "It's over now," Reacher said. "The state police are here. You're safe." He led her up the stairs and out of the house. The ranch was flooded with the flashing red and blue lights of police cars. Troopers were swarming the grounds, rounding up Kane's men. They saw Reacher and Sarah emerge from the house and immediately raised their weapons. "State police, don't move." Reacher put his hands up slowly. He had done his part. The rest was up to them. They took his statement, of course. He gave them a simplified version. He was a tourist who saw a kidnapping in progress and followed the culprits. He left out most of the details. He knew they wouldn't believe the whole truth anyway. Sarah backed up his story, her voice shaking but firm. She told them everything about Kane, about the years of fear and the people who had disappeared. They had a star witness now. The case against Kane was solid. By the time the sun came up, the ranch was a secured crime scene. Jedediah Kane and what was left of his private army were in custody. Sheriff Brody was in a police car, his head in his hands, his career and his freedom over. Reacher saw Sarah talking to a state police captain. She looked over at him and gave him a small, grateful smile. He just nodded in return. There was nothing left for him to do here. He hadn't come to redemption for thanks or recognition. He walked away from the chaos of the ranch, back down the long dirt road toward the town. Redemption felt different in the morning light. The oppressive, heavy silence was gone. People were out on the streets talking in small groups, their voices no longer hushed. The news had already spread. The fear was broken. Reacher didn't stop. He walked right through the center of town, past the diner and the library and the motel. He didn't look back. He reached the highway on the other side of town just as a long-haul truck was rumbling past. He stuck out his thumb. The truck slowed and pulled over. The driver, a weary-looking man with a friendly face, leaned across the cab. "Where are you headed?" "East," Reacher said. "Doesn't matter where." He climbed into the passenger seat, the door hissing shut behind him. As the truck pulled back onto the highway, gathering speed, Reacher took one last look in the side mirror at the small town he was leaving behind, a town that now had a chance to live up to its name. Then he turned his gaze to the road ahead, to the endless ribbon of asphalt that led to nowhere in particular, and that was exactly where he wanted to go.